It's unfortunate, but
Today, we are very pleased to have Dr. Inge Brinkman, Dr. Teshome Mossissa, and Dr. Peter Wasamba with us to talk about their project on oral literature, development, and decolonization experiences from Kenya and Ethiopia. I'll briefly introduce our speakers. Inge Brinkman is Professor of African Studies at Ghent University. Teshome Mossissa is Associate Professor of Literature in the Department of English Language and Literature at Jimma University. And Peter Wasamba is a Professor of African Literature at the University of Nairobi. He is also a lecturer of law and holds a position at the High Court of Kenya. We are very pleased to have you today here with us. So the floor is yours.
Oh, thanks a lot for offering us this opportunity. Maybe it's a plan that I share my screen with you so that you can all enjoy the PowerPoint that we prepared. Can you all see this?
yes.
Okay, so here you see an image of at least a good number of our team members. In this occasion, we were gathered in Kenya. And in this presentation, we will explain what we do. So instead of theorizing about decoloniality as a concept or reflecting on this in an abstract way, we want to share how we try to combine oral storytelling with doing decolonial development. And that leads us to a first discussion of the history of development as a concept. So for our presentation, we propose the following structure. Oh, these are the emblems of the participating institutes in our. Tarefa wants to join. Let us allow Tarefa to join. These are the institutes that are gathered in our team project. The team project is called Storytelling and Young People Coping with Crisis, Oral Narratives and Crisis Management in Kenya and Ethiopia. And this is the overview of the structure. First, discussing development. We will then discuss our All for D approach, as we call it, how we view this theme of folktales and crisis, youth generation and reconnection. And then we will discuss cooperation in our project. And after this, Peter Wasamba will discuss the experiences in Kenya in our project, after which Teshome Mossissa will discuss the experiences in Ethiopia. So the word development is actually, it's borrowed from biology. And in this discipline, so in the discipline of biology, it denotes the process by which an organism gradually grows until it reaches its fully grown natural state of being. And within development, this final developed stage is a priori known for each organism. So the growth, the direction of the growth cannot be chosen. It's laid out in advance. For example, an acorn will not become a chestnut tree. An acorn will become an oak. That's within the acorn. And as happened more often at the time in Europe, terms from biology were often applied to social phenomena. And in the course of the 18th and 19th century, the word development came to be connected with notions of progress, natural law, evolution, etc. And it acquired clear positive overtones, and it was contrasted with words like decline, stagnation, etc. During early colonialism, the word development was used, it was employed in the colonies to mean the opening up of areas for economic exploitation. So a way of mise en valeur, as it is said in French, in the name of progress. And conform to the basic definition of colonialism, the benefits of such development were clearly to be situated in the metropole. From the start, however, arguments were sought to justify development as also being beneficial for colonized people. Even at the infamous Conference of Berlin, lip service was paid to, and I quote, the improvement of the conditions of the moral and material well-being of the colonized, making reference to education and the blessings of civilization, as it was put in the General Act of the conference in 1885. Especially during late colonialism, many so-called betterment schemes where welfare plans, etc., there were different names, words used for this. They were designed and implemented in the colonies to live up to this stated aim. In other words, claims to development played a role throughout the colonial era, resulting in what Miguel Bandera Geronimo has called repressing developmentalism. Often, however, the development era is regarded as something very distinct from the colonial era, only starting after the Second World War. Harry Truman's 1949 inaugural address, in which he unfolded plans for a new point for program, that is then taken as the starting point of this new era. And in this speech, Truman really opposes the old imperialism with his own bold new program, as he really stresses a clear break with the past. Now, I think I've made clear that actually there were many connections between the colonial era and development structures. But there were some changes indeed. Firstly, of course, and this is important, in stark contrast to the notion of colonialism, the word development, it was embraced and supported by many people of the former colonies. Worldwide development came to be seen as a positive term, a goal to be reached. Furthermore, a massive development, that's also a shift from the colonial era, a massive development industry came into being that had not existed before, with particular institutions, bureaucracies, flows of people, materials, money, a jargon, etc. We can also see this in the SDGs. The SDGs really have been agreed upon by many countries, and it may be facile to criticize them in this manner. Yet it is important to point out that actually the Organization for African Union created its own Agenda 2063 prior to the development of the SDGs. And in the Agenda 2063, there are proposals for putting respect for people's experiences on the ground and for focusing on epistemological models other than that of the classic development models. So in this sense, we can fairly state that this move towards the decolonization of development was not followed by the UN. In this sense, the SDGs are really they form a step back, because within the SDGs, there's very little emphasis on epistemology, on engagement with people's experiences, etc. At the same time, we can safely state, I think, that C4D, so communication for development or culture for development, both abbreviations are used, that they they are crucial for the welfare and the well-being of people. And within this realm of both C4D and both communication and culture for development, very little attention has been paid to oral literature so far. So we want to really focus on oral literature within the realms of communication and culture for development. I think we can define oral literature as the oral artistic expression with verbal forms in different histories of different communities. So in this sense, they clearly form a cultural expression, so they belong to culture for development. At the same time, all literature is a form of communication, and so we can also classify the study of oral literature within this realm under communication for development. So what is now our aim? Our aim of this project, has been funded, let me admit, Peter, has been funded now for 3 years by, 3.5 already, yeah, by Vler Uwels in Belgium. And our aim is to explore how oral literatures can play a role in development. And if we can, and we have, I think, established that oral literature means something for development, then we can say that we have a new approach within the realms of communication or culture for development, namely oral literature for development. And this is what we call All4D. So we can view All4D as a part of C4D. Important to focus on, or in this we focus on narratives. We can't do everything. So we focus on narrative, although of course All4D can potentially also include other genres. And very often there are some assumptions on folk tales, and this is what we want to really to question, because we think that folk tales, oral literature in general, it has a history. It is changing. The assumption is very often about folk tales that they are traditional, they're folklore, it's heritage. And another assumption is very often that folk tales are for children, for educational, didactical purposes. They are to teach. We agree. And so there is as such no problem with these statements, but we want to qualify these statements because indeed oral literature has a long tradition. Very often indeed it is passed from generation to generation. It is of the people, so we can say that it is folklore. It is part of immaterial heritage, clearly. But we also want to, at the same time, point out that oral literature is not static. It's being created, recreated, it's being performed, it's being read, it's being watched. It's very dynamic. And we will come back to that, but it's important to already note this now. And also for the second assumption, yeah, we agree again. We very often see that folk tales have a particular message for children, and that they indeed very often are meant to offer a lesson, have moral implications, but we cannot reduce them to that. Especially when we see all the traditions of folk tales, they are very often very popular in the true sense of the word. So they can include anybody who wants to join, and they are not restricted to a child audience. Also, very often they are very humorous, and they have a very very ribald and rebellious and very popular, vulgar humor to them that is in friction a bit with the moral didactical framework that is very often used. And furthermore, the idea that folktales are for children very often results in a neglect of folktales. They're kind of insignificant, they're only for children. So it leads to less attention, less scholarly attention for folktales. So very often when we read analysis of oral literatures, we find ourselves asking, but when? So they make very often assumptions are made in very general sense. For example, Kikuyu people, they told stories by the fireside, or Oromo stories were used as education for children. But when did Kikuyu tell stories by the fireside? When were Oromo stories used as education for children? By whom? Where? So we often miss the specificity. And in the picture, you can see a potential storytelling context from an image of 1908. Then you see a picture of a book publication from 1970. And then you see an internet audiovisual with a Kikuyu narrative from our era. So in terms of media, in terms of audience, context, evaluation, contents, etc., storytelling has clearly changed. And I think it's really high time that we are specific when we make statements on oral literature, because, and this is an important point, oral genres are historical phenomena. It follows that we have to be specific about the era, the places, the people involved, instead of making generalized, undifferentiated, static claims about an assumed traditional past. So we still see the relevance of oral literatures being considered as tradition, folklore, immaterial heritage for children, etc. But we also want to qualify such approaches. And in our project, we view oral literature as potentially a tool for reflection, precisely because there's something very interesting happening in oral narratives. Folktales, they very often start once upon a time, quietly, innocently. Then there is a problem. There is a hunger in the land. An ogre captures children. A small animal wants to win a race from a big animal, etc. So we have a crisis situation. This is what the story starts with. And then from there, particular episodes in the folktale, they address this crisis situation, and this problem in the course of the narrative is resolved. And then they lived happily ever after. So we see actually that crisis resolution, crisis management is a very important component of folktales. And that's why we thought that actually folktales are really apt for discussing crisis situation and in potential dealing with development issues. Sometimes, here you can see how Vladimir Prop, a Russian structuralist scholar, how he indeed viewed these narrative transformations in folktales leading to a resolution. And Jack Zipes has pointed out that at times these folktales, the solutions proposed in folktales, are really in line with normative assumptions within society, and they are sometimes very stereotypical. And we all know, I think, that especially, for example, in gender norms, boys and girls can be really represented in very normative ways in folk tales. But there are also many examples of stories where folk tales propose an alternative to the norms, and they precisely question power and hierarchical structures within society. So in that sense, they can also have emancipatory impulses, like, for example, a small animal winning from a much bigger and much more powerful animal. Or indeed, we also have many examples of stories where girls are really having a lot of, are really the hero of the story. So our analysis really maps these the folktales in relation to power domains in society. And thereby, again, we can't do everything. So we have opted for 5 domains in our project, in which we really study folktales in relation to crisis situation. These reflect, on the one hand, our expertise as scholars, but they also, we noted that many folktales deal with these, with issues in these 5 domains. So in that sense, they are also following from the stories. A first domain is ecology. Very often, for example, a folktale may start with a situation of a drought, and then a hunger ensues, etc. This can lead potentially to poverty. We also have other stories on poverty. So what does the folktale tell us about overcoming the crisis of poverty is a second issue. And many folktales focus on characters that are vulnerable, sometimes because they are ill or they have a form of disability, but also, for example, pregnant women in a vulnerable position. And this potentially can lead to a crisis situation. And how does the narrative then offer hope to people who are in such a situation? Many stories tell us about human relationships, for example, relations between men and women. So the relationship between the genders and how masculinity, femininity are represented in folktales is really an issue in our discussion. And very often we see indeed that, for example, women may be excluded from certain processes in the narrative on the basis of what is this exclusion organized. And also, do we find other examples of exclusion, or so social exclusion or othering? For example, people who are not from the region, who are strangers. How are these represented in the narratives? And how does this lead to a crisis situation, and how is it resolved? We do not see these 5 domains as really separate. We really try to create connections between the domains. And also, we do not only study narratives from what we have gathered now, but also look into changing patterns of crisis resolution in folktales in these 5 domains. So as said, we want to study this. So we have collected oral folktales. We study these as scholars. We are in the process of offering our analysis of crisis management in the folktales. We are currently finishing a book publication by the team. And so we operate within the participating universities. In this, we do not only work with the group that is directly engaged in the team, we also created all-for-D hubs at the two South universities involved to really engage more scholars than just ourselves in discussing how oral literature can work for development. And our short answer so far is yes, there is a lot in these narratives that can assist in understanding today's problems. And what we want to do is not only academic, we really want to also put all-for-D in practice. So we have gone to schools, we have gone to youth centers, marketplaces, etc. And we have actively engaged oral artists, often people of an elderly status, and reconnected them with young people in classrooms. So in our project, we organized performances by storytellers, and on the basis of that, creative workshops in which we discuss together with the group of young people and the narrator how the stories told can potentially lead to reflecting on crisis situation. And it's really interesting to see, we will soon hear more on this, young people, they are now organizing themselves as theater groups. They take pride again in their own oral literatures, their own oral traditions. And with these workshops and performances, we also want to create educational tools that spread beyond the schools that we were in, so that also teachers from other parts in Africa, but also in Europe, that they can use them. So this is, for example, the publication we are currently finishing is really meant as a kind of guide for educational practitioners to provide alternative epistemological models to crisis situation but alongside the classic developmental ones. As we all know, at least I assume that you all know, Africa is a continent with many languages. And also in the two countries where we are working to implement a project, there are many languages. And based on our own experience as scholars, we have selected 4 of those languages, namely Afano, Romo, Swahili, Digo, and Kikuyu. And we find that these are important for artistic expression, but we also really want to establish and to emphasize these languages as theoretical languages, as being important in theoretical reflection. In colonial history, these languages and also their oral literatures, they have been ignored. The oral literatures are often reduced to children's books. Global hierarchies, they continue to downplay the importance of African languages and oral literatures. And we see no reason for that. All languages are equal, full stop. So we want to address that issue also through our project. We have referred to global hierarchies so far. The classic model is a northern university cooperating with a university in the south, but we want to expand that model, and Jimma University in Ethiopia and the University of Nairobi in Kenya, they are geographically quite close to each other. So to have South-South cooperation between them is a logical thing. So that is why instead of South-North, we really have a South-South-North constellation and meet each other in the course of the project. Together with Ho West is a Belgium, with an institute in Belgium, and we work together with the Department of Journalism from Ho West for more the media aspect of our project. So we build interinstitutional partnership and educational tools together. So we're three promoters from Ghent University, Jimma University, and University of Nairobi. You know this by now because we are the presenters. So I shouldn't repeat it. And these are all the team members. So you can see that we have PhD candidates from both Ethiopia and Kenya, a postdoc from University of Nairobi, and several scholars involved from the different institutes. And we talked about global hierarchies, the history of colonialism, of racism, of dominance from the global north. It has resulted in the privileging of some knowledge systems and the ignoring and even actively destroying of other knowledge systems. So words like modernity, development, etc., those are by and large epistemic systems from the global north that are regarded as an ideal by many people worldwide. Now, we have nothing against modernity or development, as long as this does not imply destroying ecosystems and destroying epistemological models from other strands. And that's precisely what happened in the history of Western global dominance. Ecosystems and alternative epistemological models have been destroyed. And this process, this process of destruction of alternative systems of knowledge production, it has been called epistemicide by De Sousa Santos. And the history of folk tales, we really believe that these can help us to still look into those alternatives. Also now, it has been pointed out by Otmar Ette, literature is a source of knowledge for living and for living together. I'm now happy to offer the floor to Peter Wasamba. Oh, I had this on workshop tools. I don't think we have time for that, do we? No, the other speakers should speak. But this is a very practical way of organizing workshops, to have 6 questions: who speaks, who sees, who acts, who does not speak, who does not see, and who does not act in the narrative. And from there, you can start your discussions. And we have some more proposals for workshop tools. Like Think, Pair, Share is a very well-known didactical tool. It really works when you have a group of young people gathered around an oral performance. It really helps to, but also co-creating alternative in the light of these more stereotypical and normative folk tales. But as said,
thank you.
It's now to Peter.
Thank you very much, Inge, and thank you very much, members of the audience. Apologies that technological challenges have made it impossible to be seen, but you'll hear me as I continue from where Inge has left. As she's put it, we are operating under oral literature for development. And I'm sharing the perspective from the University of Nairobi based on our experiences with working with communities in applying oral narrative techniques and basically using indigenous communication strategies to empower communities. And I'll focus on during this presentation on the work that we have done with the Digo community of Kwale through Kwale Arts Troupe. And I may just start by sharing that for too long, universities have been seen as detached from communities that they talk about, and that universities only visit communities to extract knowledge and to bring to the center to analyze for either certification or some other means. But in 2002, I think, between 2000 and 2002, we started working with this community when we were implementing a project on civic education. And our interest was to create civic awareness on the Constitution, on gender, on environment, and also on education. And we decided proactively to use indigenous communication strategies to create a group within a community that can identify their issues, use the language that is used in the community, and create awareness instead of us staying in the community to do that civic education. And that's how we created Kwale Art Troupe. And they were trained by my colleague, Dr. Kimingichi from our department, who has continued to train them up to the present. So we have a collaborative agreement with this community, with this group, where we empower them with skills and they identify local issues. And some of the local issues that this community has been dealing with is what they consider as political marginalization. They feel excluded from the center, land dispossession, where majority are landless since the land has been taken by people from other areas. They also feel development has excluded their area because it's at the far end on the coastal region and the city is at the center, and there is perception that upcountry is more developed. We have poor performance in education generally in that area. Then we have ecological pressure and youth unemployment. And our idea was that we should come up with a way in which the community can identify the appropriate intervention strategies based on their environment without us imposing our ideas. And we chose oral genres as one of the ways in which this community and this particular theater group, together with others that have sprung up, can make local interventions using local resources. And it's also driven by the understanding that it is always colonial to speak for people who can speak for themselves. That it's always important that we allow communities to take the center stage in identifying their issues, in devising how to address their issues. And therefore, outsiders should only play facilitative role. And that one becomes very economical. So with the Kwale Art Troupe, we've been able to work together when they take the center stage in running their affairs. And since we started this project of oral literature for development, they have been part of the group, and they have been our community mouthpiece, because after the first training on the project and the idea that the project was addressing how young people deal with crisis. And these are the crises of othering and exclusion, health issues, gender, environmental issues. The idea was to make this arts group a community hub where they can look at these issues and then use oral narrative techniques to create awareness around these issues. And it really worked for us. I'm happy that it worked because we've been there several times, and all the group members agree that this group of young people have adopted a strategy where instead of looking for solutions from outside, because there is a way in which we still suffer from colonial mindset, that when we have crisis, we think about USAID and America, we think about Danida, how outsiders can come to help us. But here we have a way in which the community is looking at how to deal with their issues in their own way without thinking about what outsiders can do. So we have been able to work with the community through Kwale Arts Group. And although it is led by young people, it has developed trust with the community members, such that when we have a performance, even elders come and they have blessing from community members. So, a good example is a performance of oral narrative, or that is called Nzala ya ndugu si mtu, which is a Kiswahili word in English meaning a brother's misfortune is not shared. What is also interesting about this performance is that even though it is an oral narrative about famine, in which an able or brother who had resources to help decided not to help a brother who was poor until one of the children died. It has now been dramatized. It is presented as a skit, and it becomes so exciting because it attracts many people to watch the performance. And when you attend that performance, there is normally a strategy of mobilizing people, whereas traditionally we would announce events through radio stations, through WhatsApp, through these other approaches. For them, when they are going to perform at a certain place, maybe it's at the beach, maybe it's at a marketplace, at a wedding, or at a school, what they do first is to do what they call Gwaride, which is a musical parade in which they perform as they go around marching through the town or the village. And as they do that, they collect the audience with them. Young people come, those who know their performance start following. By the time they get to the venue, they have mobilized enough audience and they start the performance. And the way in which they perform it is the way that resonates culturally with the community, using the language that community expects them to use, earning respect from or elders and also from young people that treat them as role models. What is also interesting is that through this process, the theater group has become more of an incubation center for young people who may venture into performance, into media, and therefore we have even some members who are now working with FM stations. And when they go there, they also use these oral narratives to create awareness. So after the performance, we have a session for workshop where community is invited to comment, to ask questions, or to just make suggestions on how those issues can be addressed. So they identify real issues that have been raised in a performance like this one. We have famine, we have poverty, but then they also realize that these narratives talk about empathy in crisis. How do we support one another at our own level without looking outside? How do we deal with poverty? And poverty is also linked to famine and also deforestation. How do we preserve environment so that rain may come and so that we can have food in abundance for everyone? Then how do we deal with the psychological impact of poverty and greed or meanness from people who are close? So we have a workshop that addresses all these issues. And by the time that the performance ends, it is not just about the entertainment. It is more about the learning. And this is what brings me back to Inge's presentation, that we may treat Digo oral narratives as folklore, yes, but they go beyond folklore. Digo oral narrative is a living archive. It is also their epistemology. It demonstrates how they understand their world, how they interpret it, and how they respond to crisis in their own way. And therefore, you will find that through genres like skits, narration, poetry, songs, puppetry, and spoken word, Kwale Arts Troupe has been able to engage with young people so that young people do not just rely on AI and Google to find solutions to the problems that affect them at the local level, because what answers they get are global from different contexts, and therefore to empower community to use their oral genres in a contemporary environment and to make people look at their problems using a rear view mirror, in the sense that the problems we face today may require that we reflect on how our grandparents encountered similar problems and how they dealt with them, so that we can improvise and build up on indigenous knowledge in addressing contemporary challenges that we face. So, in concluding, I can say that through our experience with the Kwale Art Group, we've been able to confirm, just as we started in 2000, that oral literature can be used for development. Oral literature can be used to address these challenges that young people face, from health, education, environmental issues, and even othering and exclusion. I thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Let us continue with Teshome to explain how this works at Jimma University and the wider Oromia region.
I would like to thank the African Studies Global Virtual Forum for the chance you have given us to present the milestone we have done about our project. I will be presenting the implementation phase of the project at Jimma University. It focuses on the practice in 3 sites, namely Jimma, Naqamt, which is about 250 kilometers from Jimma, and Addis Ababa, the capital city, which is about 350 kilometers from Jimma. Just when we were beginning the project, the first step was the setup of oral literature for development hub. So we had to establish the hub first. So a separate office was given for the hub by the university, and laptop, video recordings, printing machines, and other equipments were fulfilled by the project budget from the capital project, which was actually allocated by our project. Then a team composed of 10 members was established. Actually, that is from PhD candidates and from officers of the institution of Oromo Studies, the director and the research coordinator, and MA students. Then what we did was the series of stakeholders meeting, organizing series of stakeholders meeting in the 3 sites. After smooth communication was made with leadership of the schools in the 3 sites, namely Gada Secondary School in Jimma town, and Naqamt Secondary School in Naqamt, and General Taddisa Birru Secondary School at Finfinne or Addis Ababa. Artists, teachers, elders, talented students, officers from Culture and Tourism and Education Bureau were identified as participants of the performance and the workshop. And during our stakeholders meeting, what we did was we fixed dates of performances and workshops. And then what follows was the performance. We here in our project proposal, we have proposed that we will use artists as we were just going on implementing the project. A creative idea also emerged, and we used students from theatrical arts department at Jimma University to prepare a video of performance. So what we did was a video for the performance are made ready. And let me explain a bit about this. First, the story is chosen from data of our PhD students that best fits to at least one or more of the domains, which are the domains that have been presented by Professor Inge. We do have 5 domains, and we identified stories which actually best fit to one or at least more domains. And then it is changed to a script in a way that fits to performance by artists. It means the 4th-year theater art students. So they actually practiced. At least we gave them for about 3 to a month's time, and they, after a series of practices, then we just videotape the performance. That video is used.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can you wrap up the presentation in like 5 minutes because of time considerations?
Yeah, I will do that. The video is used on the performance to provoke discussions. Following that, artists tell stories related to one of the 5 domains. As has been said, we are looking for alternative knowledge from the community. There are elders, there are teachers, and there are artists, and there is knowledge in the oral traditions. So we want them to bring out that, and just we use that for further discussion. What I observed in the course of the performance is that participants are very much impressed in the stories. Either they watched through videos or told. We have videos of quite interesting responses from actually the participants. Following that, a workshop is held. Different methods of engaging participants have been used, such as pair share, group work, debate, and then presentations. We have videos of elders and youth when they are presenting alternatively. The elders presenting the discussions and the youth following that. And when we see that intergenerational link, we were very much happy that the knowledge that exists in Africa, the knowledge that can serve to solve crisis situation, transferred from the elderly person to youth, actually observing that in the workshop is quite very interesting. That intergenerational link is quite impressive, in fact. Here attempts are made on the workshop to make participants bring out the rich and existing knowledge that enables one to solve different crises. It can be gender crisis, poverty as a crisis, disease, and many other crises. Discussions are made to put youth in the scenario so that they will use it in their future life. Sometimes attempts are made to explore or look into thinking of even subverting some stories and changing the content of some stories, which are actually, for example, there are stories that are dominantly portraying patriarchal ideologies when females become victim. Those stories are presented, and then discussions are made, and we just discuss, and the group also discuss how to create a fair and gender balance in the stories we are constructing afterwards. And those discussions actually in the workshops are quite interesting. And the other thing we use is these performances and workshops are disseminated. Professor Inge has already told us that our book is on the process, and we have been using different mechanisms of disseminating the experiences we have got in the project. For example, there are showcases are displayed and presented to participate at Jimma University Research Week last year. And the project is also chosen for this year, as I have already informed you in the beginning. And there are other alternative ways of disseminating our projects, like mainstream media, such as OBN is one of the mainstream medias. It is a television in Oromo, and there is another mainstream media, OBN radio, and Jimma University has got Jimma University Community Radio, and we are disseminating the good experiences we have been obtaining in the project. Then our future plan actually is to organize performances and workshops for this year. As Professor Inge has already mentioned, we are almost on 3.5 year project phase. So on this year, on our 4th phase, we are going to hold performances and workshops in the 3 sites. And also, we have lots of lessons learned from the project. And the issue we are focusing now and onwards in the course of the project implementation.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. So is the issue of sustainability. This is a project work, and it will cease after 5 years. But the good practice has to continue, at least in the sites identified. And actually, the schools need to keep on linking the elderly people with the young generation, and clubs should actually operate actively in the absence of the project. And that is what we are aggressively working on. For that, for example, in Nakant, in one of the sites identified, a board that oversees different clubs of youth has already been established, and they have a meeting on monthly basis. And on the 3rd month, we evaluate what they are doing, and we observe how far the students are actually practicing stories to solve crisis. And this actually is also implemented in General Tadesse Birru Secondary School at the capital city. And interestingly, these students initiated by our project are shining in the city and competing for performances, and they were awarded 2 times 20,000 Ethiopian birr twice. And actually, it is fascinating for us to see them actually shining. And this actually make us that the sustainability is going in the right track. So I could have said a lot, and thank you. And because we are against time, I have to stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I mean, this is such an engaging talk, but I would also like to open the discussion to the audience. Thank you so much for this fascinating project. I'll now give the floor to Dr. Makoni briefly to engage with you in a short discussion, and after that, we'll open the discussion to the broader audience.
Thank you very much. This is a fascinating presentation. I only have about 2 questions that I want to raise. I want to talk about folktales and development, and I'll move on to the other part. So is your argument that folktales will help you rehabilitate the concept of development? Is that the core of the argument?
I think it was clear that we had some issues with the notion of development as it is used.
Yes. But
But
the question you are trying to rehabilitate that notion somehow by using folktale.
Yeah, because as Otmar Ette has pointed out, literature can be seen as a framework for living and for living together. And I think to live and to live together in a way that is development, isn't it?
Yeah, but what I want to ask about this is, in the body of scholarship that you read, not the English-based scholarship on development, let's say French, Portuguese, Swahili, etc. What is the ontological status of discussions about development? Put aside the English body of scholarship. I just want to get a sense of where this notion is. Because what tends to happen in scholarship is that in Portuguese, for example, development may be seen in one way, but it may be seen very differently in Spanish and all that. So I'm just trying to get a sense of how.
Yeah, sure. That's why we really want to open up the discussion on development and not restrict it to the notion of development in terms of progress but we really want to see it as a framework for living and for living together, and in that sense tying in with literature, because for us development means indeed that you live well and that you live well together. So we really want to frame development very broadly, and I think the folktales tie in with our broad definition of development, because also in the folktales, they lived happily ever after. It can be defined in so many ways, and it's about a source for living and a source for living together, and we don't see any reason to have a more restricted notion of development or to define it in a very abstract manner. But really discussing with people, what do you regard as living well and living well together?
Okay, I do not spend too much.
Well, if I may, interfere, and if the example I'm giving may suffice, satisfy you, actually development might not be seen in our case as the example as has been given, but for example, development of the Western notion, where infrastructure such as roads and houses are built well and this and that kind. But for example, a simple example is in Nekam Secondary School, what the students, after this project, what the students did, the clubs in the student did is, they identified a forest and they named that forest after the name of one of the protagonists in the folktale. Mind you, what are they doing? They are taking care of the forest. And where have they get the name from? From the protagonist on the folktale. And how can that assist development? Actually, if they take care of those forests, it might not be immediate effect, but in the course of time, that these students are contributing towards care for forest, actually contributes for development, and it protects drought, and indirectly that could actually help the people not hit by drought, and as a result of which poverty may come. So it might not be a very immediate effect, but it may contribute, even though it is gradually, for the development notion we are talking.
Yeah, I do not to focus too much on development. There are people on this call that know more about it than I do. But I want you to follow my thinking and see whether I am completely I'm completely wrong on this. Folktales, you said somewhere, are not fixed and timeless truths. Is that the case? That they are variable and they are fluid, there are multiple variations of folktales. Right. And if that is the case, then what becomes interesting is when you start writing folktales, let's say in books, etc., aren't you fixing them in time and place? Aren't you running counter to what that folktale is all about? In other words, let me put it more dramatically.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
writing down folktales is always problematic.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
then you reduce the folktales
Yes.
to
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. But
okay.
on the other hand, we note that if students in a school are encountering readings of folktales, it can encourage oral storytelling in schools, and that as such can really be helpful, I think. So in that sense,
That's fine.
if the publications are framed well, they can still form a source of inspiration to do more in terms of oral performance.
No,
but you're quite right, of course. Yeah.
Then my next question, then I'll ask you the last question, then I put it down. I am ideologically sympathetic towards your argument that communities must speak for themselves rather than scholars speak for themselves. How do you handle a situation in which within the communities there's disagreement about the nature of the knowledge or who should speak for them, etc.? There are gender difference, intergenerational differences. How practically, in your experiences, do you handle this? Because these communities, even if you're talking from the ground up, are not homogeneous. And there are people who move in and out of those communities. How do you handle that?
If I may answer that one.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, disagreements are not bad. Because when we disagree, that's when we find truth. And even in conferences, scholars thrive on disagreements always. So even at the community level, there are always disagreements on whether that performance was a good one and whether it met the standards. The idea is how it is moderated so that finally there is consensus on the criteria that is used to judge a good performance from a mediocre one.
Okay, that's fine. That's what I wanted to know, the mechanisms that you use to try and get to know. Now, my last question is, you are focusing on East Africa, but for the life in me, I'm not sure why you can't look for folktales, community engagement in Belgium as well. Why is this study only grounded in Africa, etc.? Why not use all these concepts that you've come up with, folktales, community engagement, development, and study Belgium as a case study as well? And what will you see if you were to look for folktales in Belgium?
Actually, we also have implemented various. Okay, I'm in African studies.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Frankly speaking, I do not know so much about European folktales. I have read, reading all the fairy tales, so the written, published versions. I've read most of those. But we also do workshops at Ghent University, and through a colleague we also have workshops at high schools in Belgium. Yeah. So we are actually doing what you are saying.
Okay, that's fine. That's what I was just curious to know why Europe is excluded from such a project.
No.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Let me hand over to Oski.
Thank you for your questions.
Thanks a lot.
Very interesting.
Thank you so much for the question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have about 20 minutes for our Q&A session. After that, we'll move on to after party session. So I'm gonna start with the comments chat box. So we have a question from Ian. Ian says, I often hear you all use the terms story and narrative to describe the work that you do. Do you see these terms as having the same meaning, or do they have different meanings? I wonder in relation to folk tales, since you mentioned quite rightly that Northern epistemological paradigms often devalue folk tales as methodologically unrigorous, unserious, and quote-unquote for children. We cannot hear you. You are muted right now.
Well, if I may just enter, actually narrative is a broad term that may include written narratives. For example, there are also fictional narratives. So a novel can also be serve as a narrative, and as the colleague might have raised in the question, there is a stereotypical type of understanding that the stories are not serious. But I remember, this reminds me, my master's class teacher, who actually, when he was teaching us about narratology, began with, stories are not innocent. Stories are not innocent. They carry meaning. They do have energy. That they are not obsolete. There is meaning in stories. There is imagination in stories. They can drive for action in stories. Just seen from African perspective, they are very powerful in shaping imaginations. Actually, children, by the way, children, when they are told stories in their early childhood, what they do is they develop their imaginative skill. And that imaginative skill enables them to be perfect architects in the latter life of their engineering learning. That skill doesn't come overnight. It is developed gradually. And stories are the base, and they are the mother that nurture someone's imagination and that nurture someone's emotional skill, which actually could help that person to be effective in the latter life of in the latter part of his life, joining in different disciplines. Actually, if for example, if you can take stories where that actually has to do with empathy. Actually, a doctor has to have an empathy to treat a given patient. Where does that empathy comes from? It is not automatic. It has to be nurtured as early as possible in our stories, where one develops love, affection, empathy with others in stories. And that gradually builds the person as a whole person and just contribute towards the profession that we think are serious in the latter development of a person.
Okay. If you don't want to add anything to that, I'll move on to the next question.
Yeah, I was just I find the distinction between fairy tales and folk tales quite instructive when it comes to terminology. But For the rest, I would say that we indeed rather loosely use the terms story and narratives as synonyms. But I fully appreciate the question. Yeah.
Okay, Salikoko, you can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for this thought-provoking presentation. I want to return to the exchange between the presenters and Makoni about what I understand to be the contribution of oral literature to development. And I appreciate your interpretation of development. But what I don't hear from you is the fact that oral literature can do this because it stores traditional knowledge, traditional cultural practices, such as how to react to challenges of changes in the natural ecology. What would you do? And the implication in terms of decoloniality, as I understand it, would be instead of waiting for solutions imposed on you from the West, or instead of soliciting for solutions from the global North, you can return to your own traditional practices and see how you can solve the problems. You emphasize the aspect of living together. That's fine. And I think I heard Teshome say, what was it? That you ultimately read a consensus in the community. That's an ideal community. A community that has a consensus on everything would be really ideal. But is the suggestion that I'm making correct? What you should really focus on is the fact that oral tradition enables you to maintain some of the cultural practices and not just set them aside or ignore them and wait for solutions that come from the global North.
I would say that it works differently in different stories. So we had stories in which indeed there is a whole history really, encoded in the narrative, and it is really if you study that narrative, if you carefully listen to that narrative, then you really learn about your past. But it can also indeed lead to, we are not seeing, if you break an arm, go to the hospital. So it's not like we are saying, that you should do away with some developments in the developmental sphere. That's not our idea. So oral literature does not offer like a final immediate solution, nor even, as has been pointed out, one moral lesson. But we see that people start reflecting on the basis of their own historical and cultural repertoire on the issues of today. And sometimes indeed in disagreement, sometimes in reference to their history, sometimes really in terms of social media, of what happens today, the youngsters. But it functions as a tool for reflection. Okay. And I think that is also, in order to live well and to live well together, I think some reflection doesn't do any harm, does it?
Well,
that was a joke.
I have to go to a meeting, but if I can add something, then I believe I have a looser interpretation of oral literature, because I have heard people in families relate things that their grandparents used to do. and they are not part of those narratives that are repeated from one individual to another. They are restricted to families. And often people bring up these stories because there is some wisdom about what they are reporting. I think those should be included. They needn't be ignored. People can tell stories coming strictly from their family backgrounds.
Do you want to add anything to that, or shall I move on to the next question?
I thought it was very interesting what was just being said. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Ashraf, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much to the three presenters. Enjoyed the presentation. I need to have a couple of questions that are building. They build on the previous questions by Simply and somehow Kirko. The first question is that why oral literature, when oral literature or oral folk tales written down, why do they still remain oral? And that's the first question. The second question is about the C for D, communication for development. I think you tried to rescue, as Simply said, rescue the notion of development by redefining it as living together, right? But living together where? Living together, as I understand it, from that literary perspective, within the text, not outside the text, right? Because outside, what I'm looking for actually is the decolonial aspect and the colonial aspect. It's almost absent in the presentation. It's not visible, the colonial and the decolonial aspect. We have been given is a very interesting definition of development in communal terms, but still within the text. What's going on? We're not told about what actually goes on outside even those theatrical performances in the actual community, the wider in the wider structural historical, context, and also, I mean, more concretely, the decolonial aspect. It's not there. So what's precisely being decolonized? And the meta language, oral literature, is the final point. You touched on this in the presentation, but still oral literature, oral folklore, or folk tales, as we know, they are somehow constructed from the modern linear conception of development. And this is, I think, the contradiction which was pointed to by Simply. See the point? Oral literature is constructed as a contrast to written literature, right? All that's produced by the non-West is oral, right? What's produced by the West is written. It's history. As researchers are using that colonial language, that colonial meta language, oral. And this is one of the serious, this use of that meta language has very serious meta language effects, ramifications. So how do you react to this? Thank you very much.
You are muted.
If I may react to part of it, because I think there are quite a number. The issue that we are studying oral literature, but it is written. If I got the question right, actually oral literature is a performance. The fact that it is written is just for convenience and for concretizing it for study. But that has also changed now because of technology, because with time we are going back to the actual performance in which oral literature is now performed live. It is recorded, it is uploaded on YouTube, it is on Twitter, it is the way it is. And therefore, we are studying oral literature as a performance. And the very fact that oral literature is written down does not kill or the genre itself. Of course, it is a secondary version because what is written down cannot replace the actual performance. And that's why fieldwork is an integral part of any oral literature study, because that is where we meet performances as they are and as they should be. Then two is the issue of there was also the issue of written. It has really escaped me. The other question I had planned to respond, but I'll leave my colleagues to respond to that as well. Thank you.
Now, the first question, if I actually correctly heard you, is why is oral literature remain alive? Is that the question?
It's about the history of the meta language itself, oral literature. We know it has a history that's embedded in colonialism, right? What's produced outside the West is oral history, oral literature, is supposed to reflect, to mirror directly the actual lived reality. And that's fundamentally mistaken, as we know. That's the point.
Yeah, this is this Eurocentric type of defining oral literature. And we may not agree with this definition because it is universalizing the very definition of oral literature. But if you ask me from my perspective as an Oromo, as who actually lived telling stories on the fireside, and as a person who actually created the memories of those stories, the imaginative, the memories of those stories, I can say that it is powerful, it has shaped me, it has inculcated in me strong moral values, which are actually helping me to just define who I am today and how I have to behave today. Therefore, when I think of oral literature from my perspective, actually, it is quite many things for me. Be it defined as something not serious because this orally, everything that is associated to oral is associated to uncivilized, associated to someone who has not taken seriously of life, of what technology or whatsoever it is, that I respect as a perspective from that person and that side and that angle. But as far as I am concerned, from African experience point of view, it is actually one of the pillars of African culture that made Africa strong, resilient, and powerful. And that is what I can say. And another question is the real and the idle notion of oral literature. Yes, of course, if you look at fairy tales, they are too imaginative and too impractical and blah, blah, blah. But the image they create, in shaping values, in creating strong moral strength is actually gives sense as far as I am concerned. So it is not only oral literature, as far as I'm concerned, net is not idle, but to some extent, I can see it shaping the society.
Thank you so much. I know that there is still a lot of engagement in the chat box, and I see Lynn Mario's hands raised up. But we can continue our conversation in the after party session. So I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Makoni to make any closing comments about today's presentation.
No, I would like to thank my colleagues for this fascinating collaborative project that they are engaged in, and the many different conceptual and political issues that they are trying to struggle with. And I'm sure in the after party we will continue discussing this. Do you happen to know who is presenting next Friday?
Yes.
Yeah,
So
okay.
next Friday, we'll be hosting Sonia Martin from York University, who will be talking about languaging with Lake Ontario for international education. So please stay tuned for our email announcement. And I'll also share the link for speaker nomination. So feel free to nominate any speakers that you feel whose work feels like interesting to the audience here. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Let's ask Lynn Mario